So looking at him now, George, where do you feel that he will go next? Because boxing's amazing, isn't it? You're only as bad as your last fight. You're only as good as your last fight. That's the upside and the downside to it at times. You're back in the game so quickly, especially when you've got the added bonus of that surname. There are downsides to that at times, but generally speaking, it is a plus, and it has been a plus for him. So difficult to second guess someone like him, to be honest. But if you were him, what would you be looking at?
Well, as you say, Andy, the name and the profile opens so many doors for him. And here in Britain at the moment, with like 3 major promoters rather than 2, it kind of being a major name, and if you can sort of be a bit fluid and a bit, roll with the punches, we say, it can really work in your favour. Yeah, he's just headlined a Sky pay-per-view card against Liam Smith. He's had 2 fights now with Liam Smith on Sky pay-per-view. And he's always had this fight with Conor Benn in the back pocket. And where will that land? What network would that be on? Originally it was supposed to be on DAZN in terms of the TV. And I think Eubank, I don't know. Is it Golovkin? Does he think Golovkin right now is the right time? Risk reward makes sense. Good money. Or is it Conor Benn? And I got a feeling that we're all Conor Benn.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to get past that, really, isn't it? Eddie's been talking about it this week. Eddie Hearn saying that he's met up with Calisal and that they've spoken about it already. There is the obvious problem with it, of course, which is that the British Boxing Board of Control and the National Anti-Doping Panel appealed, basically, that clearance of Conor Benn, which was issued by UKAD. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. So currently, he doesn't have a licence under the BBBFC, so couldn't box in this country. I don't know what the next steps in that protocol are, but they could always take it abroad, potentially. It's a huge fight. Golovkin's a great name, but he hasn't boxed for a year. He's 41, and he just doesn't have the same name recognition that Conor Benn has got. Crazy though that may sound to boxing fans, because just so many people on the fringes of boxing who are general sports fans, again, like Eubank, they know that surname.
Yeah, you're right, Andy. And so commercially, it makes sense, and it feels like people are waiting for it to happen because it's been talked about for so long now. When it was first sort of floated, and I think it was Eubank himself who was almost calling out Conor Benn, who was a welterweight at the time, middleweight, who had fought a super middleweight, and you're like, this is laughable. But the fight was made, the guys were set, and then obviously Conor Benn fails a drugs test, and we're how long later, trickling along now. But Conor Benn is still ringside for Eubank's fight with Smith. He's calling him out. He wants to make this fight. He's frustrated. He thinks, he's been unfairly prevented from fighting. But it depends who you talk to and what information you've got, what conclusion you come to for that. But you're right in saying that he's not clear to fight in the UK as it is right now. And then does that fight really want to go abroad? If it is 2 historic names and they're going to fight each other, you'd ideally want to see it where everyone can get behind it, and having it here in the UK, I think that's great for both fighters, sort of legacy. I was involved in big fights, at home and abroad, and the ones that were abroad just don't get mentioned, don't get talked about. So as a former fighter, I know the ones that are here in the UK, they just capture the public's imagination differently. And I think by hook or by crook, somehow they'll want to get this fight done. I think Team Eubank will probably be looking at Conor Benn, and how do we get this fight done? It's a fight that he'll be supremely confident of taking, because he's just a naturally bigger guy. He's in good form. We see at the weekend. Conor Benn's been out of the ring. Frustration. Still relatively inexperienced. Hasn't had a world title fight yet. Hasn't had many big nights, big fights. So and never, I don't think, and off the top of my head, if he's ever been an underdog either, and I'd make him an underdog certainly in a Eubank Benn fight if it comes about.
Okay, well, Conor Benn spoke exclusively to White and Jordan this week and was asked that burning question: would he still fight Eubank Jr?
100%. I don't believe I need a warm-up fight. Given everything that's going on and has gone on, I'd like to do it here for the supporters, for everyone who's continued to support me through this period. A December massive showdown would, be a treat for the fans, most definitely.
Well, there you have it. I didn't really expect him to say anything different, to be honest with you. What would be different, though, I think, is that, as you mentioned there, George, before we heard that clip, the first time around, it was kind of Eubank who needed him. Now it's the other way around. The first time, the boot regarding calling the shots was on Conor Benn's foot, and he made it at 157, and there were rehydration clauses and all that kind of thing, and Eubank had to suck that up. He's not going to be agreeing to anything like that this time around, is he? But you wouldn't expect, would you? Eubank will be saying, no, listen, I've just beaten Liam Smith. You're going through what you've gone through. I'm the name here now. But we're A sides, B sides, it makes... I lose the will to live with it sometimes. But it matters, doesn't it? You've negotiated massive fights and it matters. And for Eubank, surely now it's a straight no. 160, no rehydration clauses. Take it or leave it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think sometimes you're negotiating and you're hoping to have the fans' opinion, the people's opinion on your side. And I think that the general fight fan won't want to see it at 157 with a rehydration clause. And I'm sure that will even the score to a certain degree. But the fight fan will want to... No, you do it at middleweight. Do it at 160. And we want to see the very best version of Eubank Jr. We don't want to see him talking about being 60% or whatnot. Because I don't want to hear that as a fighter. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to be invested in tuning into a fight where the fight is not actually at 100%. And we've already sort of touched on it earlier on the show. You have to be an actor and say that you are 100% when you're not the opposite, and say you're exactly less than what you actually are.
Exactly.
So Conor Benn, he had a meteoric rise, it felt, in a really short space of time where everyone got behind him. He was with the lead promoter, Eddie Hearn, on the Zone that were doing, big stuff on the social media stuff. His profile rocketed, and everyone jumped behind him and really started to back him. And then since the news broke that he'd failed a drugs test, he's had to do a lot of damage control, and he's been left. He probably feels he's been left out in the cold, and he's had to work hard for keep his name, keep his profile. And how has he dealt with that? How has he coped with that, Andy? Has he used that frustration to his advantage? We'll only find out when he finally fights. Or has it eaten him up and put miles on the clock for him in his career? He's still chasing a Eubank fight. So I don't think he has an awful lot of options out there. And if he stays at welterweight, obviously we've got Terence Crawford and a whole host of other extremely talented welterweights that I'm sure he'd love to be in the mix with. But again, I wouldn't pick him as a favourite to win any of them big fights because he doesn't have the experience yet, and it's not like you can bank on some amateur pedigree or anything of the sort in that regard. So it makes sense for him to be chasing this Eubank fight. This two big names, certainly even bigger names when they face each other. I'm sure he'd be comfortable coming up to middleweight, taking away the rehydration clause. But what he might not be comfortable with is that not everyone's going to be singing his praises and on his side and hoping he wins. We never know by the time if the fight does get made, and how each fighter portrays themselves, and what the public buy into and what they get behind. But at the moment right now, he certainly doesn't have the support that he had once had.
No, that's a good point as well, because when he was on that rise, everybody got behind him. Like you said, he was really popular. He was kind of the next big thing, and he spoke really well, and people loved the way that he talked about his story and the grind of professional boxing. And Eubank's just always been the villain, hasn't he? And I get the feeling that he just doesn't really like it that much anymore. He doesn't really understand it particularly. And maybe we'll get this mad turnaround where all of a sudden Eubank's kind of this people's champion and Conor Benn is the villain. It's entirely possible. Just on those two, Conor Benn's got more time on his side than Eubank. If you had to put your money on one of them winning a world title, which one would it be?
Well, I think Eubank doesn't have time on his side at all. He fought me for my world title, but that was 5 years ago now, and hasn't been in the mix since. Obviously, we had slow boxing throughout COVID, but since then, he hasn't looked to really push for a world title fight, in my opinion, and it's tough. Obviously, you got Charlo in there with middleweight belt, and Golovkin's been about, but there's been no talk. So if the belts scatter, and maybe as I say, he's got that profile where he can maybe pick up a vacant title, fighting as the A side, and maybe win. But I'm not quite sure. I'm not sure if he'll be interested in chasing that route. Conor Benn, welterweight, I don't think he can win a world title.
I mean, it's tough for him, isn't it? Because one fighter's got all of them at welterweight. He's probably the best fighter in the world, Crawford. Charlo's got them all at super welter, but he's moving up to super middle. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. It's tough. Yeah,
it really is tough. I mean, I'd love to say Conor being the younger fighter. I'd love to see him in the mix with some more gatekeeper / former world champions, and see where he's at. But if even Ennis and other, rising stars in that welterweight division, he's got his hands full if that's where he stays. But if he's been lingering up like close to the middleweight mark for this Eubank fight, then maybe his welterweight days are over. Maybe he will never get back down to that weight and be solid at it, because that's what happens as fighters. If you put on the weight and you put on the natural weight, not just blown up with a bit of excess visceral fat and fluid and body and water, and that can easily strip back off. If you put on a bit of muscle, then sometimes it doesn't want to come back off, and sometimes it's dangerous, and you're not the same fighter when you do try and come back down to your original weight division. So he might be now a solid light middleweight, and with Charlo, who's got all the belts, fighting Alvarez, is there options going to be there for him after that fight, that mega fight between them two guys? Will he stay in the division? Will he let the belts go? Will they scatter? If anything, he just needs to get himself back able to fight, so that he's in a position to challenge for anything that does come up.
Yeah, that's the absolutely key thing. I do feel like his days at welterweight, for the reasons you just mentioned there, I do feel like they are behind him now. He would know best, but first and foremost, he has to get that ability, that clearance to fight back really before anything that we were just discussing there becomes particularly relevant.